At the end of the day, the question I always ask myself is there anything else I'd rather be doing? In many of those cases, whether it was, starting a wine bar, which, really in a city that I'd never been to with a partner I met one time, or raising a first-time fund, at the end of the day, despite all the rejections, despite, the difficulties you have to overcome, there's truly nothing else in those moments that I would rather be spending my time on.
Welcome to the latest episode of Maker's Mindset. I'm your host, Nancy Twine. In this episode, I'll be in conversation with Anu Duggal, founding partner of Female Founders Fund, which is the largest early stage fund investing in companies started by female founders. The fund launched in 2014 and now manages $100 million of assets under management and has invested in industry-defining companies like Maven Clinic, Zola, Rent the Runway, Billy, and more. Anu has been honored in Fortune's 40 Under 40 list, Crain's Notable Women in Tech list, and Business Insider's Ultimate List of Female Startup Investors. She's also the host of the podcast, The 2%. Prior to starting Female Founders Fund, Anu co-founded Exclusively.in, a private sale e-commerce company, which was acquired in 2011. Her first entrepreneurial venture was in 2005 with the launch of India's first wine bar, The Tasting Room in Bombay. Let's go ahead and jump in. Welcome, Anu. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So Anu, you are the founding partner of Female Founders Fund, which launched in 2014, and it's now the largest early stage fund investing in female founded companies. Can you share the story behind what led you to start Female Founders Fund, and what inspired you to focus on investing in female-led startups?
Sure. First of all, thanks so much for having me. So my background prior to starting the fund was as a founder myself, kind of going out to market to raise capital. There was a pretty clear kind of issue at hand. So I had co-founded an e-commerce company, and looking at our employee base, our customer base, our team, senior management, it was predominantly female. And when we went out to raise capital, I was just struck by the fact that almost everybody that we met across the journey, whether it was an angel investor or a venture capitalist, was male. And so looking at the numbers, it became clear there was a bigger issue at hand. So, I'm sure many of you know, 2% of venture capital goes to companies started by women. So after our company exited, I moved to New York, started doing some angel investing, and got introduced to a bunch of really great founders, a lot of whom were women, and a lot of whom were facing a similar issue, which was getting access to that first round of capital. And, it's pretty clear you can't build a venture backable business if you can't get access to that first round. So for me, it was a white space. And my longer term view was that this is going to change. You're going to start to see really interesting venture backable businesses being started by women like yourself as a proof point. And there's a real white space and an opportunity to build a pool of capital that is really meant to target that demographic.
And actually, before you started a fund, you were an entrepreneur. And I believe you started your entrepreneurial journey with the launch of India's first wine bar, The Tasting Room in Bombay. So can you share a little bit more about how that venture came about and what motivated you to launch in the hospitality industry?
Yeah. So slight correction, I'm still an entrepreneur.
Yes.
A little bit of a difference between, a VC and kind of starting a fund. So I started my career, it's funny, you look back and you're like, how did all of this bring me to where you are today? But, when I graduated from college, I was really excited about kind of the food world, and New York. This was kind of the heyday of the celebrity chef period. Mm-hmm. And so the first year after college, I actually was working at McKinsey, but during the evenings, I would work at Tabla, which was an Indian restaurant in New York. And after that, went to cooking school and was really passionate about starting something in the food space. And my parents were living in India. I used to, go back home to visit and just realized that, when you think about the development and evolution of wine appreciation, there was nothing in India at the time. And so I ended up getting introduced to one of India's largest wine makers who actually went to Stanford. And we decided to work together. And it was such a crazy story for me because, I was 24, 25. I'd actually never been to Bombay, which is where the wine bar, where we opened it. And so didn't know anyone, had met my partner once. So it was really, kind of a roller coaster ride, but amazing experience.
Wow. And so from hospitality into e-commerce, now venture capital, clearly your background has been very diverse. How did you navigate the transition from launching the tasting room to co-founding exclusively.in? And what inspired you to pivot into the tech industry?
I actually went to business school after the tasting room and graduated in 2008, which, over half my class was employed by Lehman. So really challenging time, and got an email from, an old friend who said, there's this really exciting business model in the US that is taking off called Guilt. And I was living in India at the time. And he said, what do you think? Should we, try this out? And so I spent 6 months talking to designers, just leveraging my network. And eventually he moved and, we started building a team. But I think just kind of reflecting back on your point around the diversity of career choices, I think one thing that's really informed my decision-making and kind of guided me is the fact that you don't really actually need to have a ton of experience within an industry to cause disruption. And I know that's very parallel to your, to what you've built, is that sometimes looking at it from the outside, the insights and quite frankly, the fearlessness are kind of very powerful.
Absolutely.
In helping you kind of launch something.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think part of my success and coming from finance and succeeding with a beauty business actually stemmed from just being a bit naive, right? Like not feeling like I knew all the answers and really thinking very innovatively to get to, a place that hadn't really been reached before. So I think there's a lot of power to doing something for the first time in that way.
Yes.
So this is a topic that I'm really passionate about because, it's a dynamic of a lot of industries, especially in private equity, because it's so male dominated. Because of that dynamic, the fact that you hadn't worked in private equity prior to starting the fund and you did all of this alone without any partners, I mean, it's truly amazing. A lot of people would think like, oh my gosh, the odds are so stacked against you. What would make you think you could do something like this? And I'm really curious to know what aspects of your life or upbringing do you think really inspired that level of just relentlessness and confidence that you could do it that drove you to where you are today?
Oh, well, thank you. First of all, I mean, I think ultimately there are two things that kind of come to mind. So the first is, what we just touched on is kind of the lack of experience and lack of knowledge about an industry actually plays to your favor. So I'll be honest, I had no idea what I was doing. But I think that I'm very open to asking for help and advice. And so I remember that first fund, 700 meetings. Every single person I met, I asked them to introduce me to one more person. And so, developing that network and ultimately finding people that were real believers was really what kept me going. And I think when I look across my career, one kind of common theme is also sales, which, that word sounds not great, but ultimately it's, you have to be not afraid of rejection. And I think just having that, that sense of, persistence and resilience that I think has been incredibly valuable.
Absolutely. And I love that parallel to sales because all the sales people I know are extremely resilient because you've got to keep pressing on despite hearing all the no's constantly. So that's super interesting. Obviously investing, being an entrepreneur, and inherently that all involves risk, right? How do you approach finding the right balance between taking calculated risks and ensuring that your sub-investors are, getting those returns that they hope for, both from a female founders fund perspective, but also some of the startups that you personally invest in?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I think about what we're building with the fund, we are trying to do more than just return capital. We're trying to really move an industry forward. And so I always put a little bit of extra pressure on our founders saying that, you're winning not just for yourself or for the fund, you're really trying to help create a movement that is so overdue in this industry. And so So I think, with that lens, seed investing, when you think about the ratios of success, historically, you have 33% of your companies that will shut down, 33% that will return, the capital that you put in, and the remainder that will really generate the majority of the returns. And so often we're investing in just people, in an individual or a team. And, I remember meeting Kate from Maven, and this was pre-launch. The company's now valued at 1.35 billion. And to me, it was her resilience. Yeah. She was a journalist. Wow. She had zero experience in digital health or healthcare generally. And she was so passionate, and her ability to, again, attract people that I would have never imagined would be, in her network and community from those early days was really compelling. And, now having 3 kids under 6, managing 600 employees. It's incredible, but it's a testament to what we saw in those early days, which is her commitment to really changing healthcare for women.
Yeah, it's really phenomenal. And I think it's just so inspiring. I feel like we could probably do a whole series on women who have transitioned into new industries and who have done incredible things. And I think for me, that's one of the top questions that I get from a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs that sometimes get in their head about, can I really do it if I've never done it before? And there's so many incredible proof points of people who have. Yeah. You talked a little bit earlier about the power of networking, which I am a huge believer in also, because, both as an entrepreneur, as an investor, it's so essential for just unlocking opportunities. And I think that you are probably one of the more impressive networkers that I've met. You're so generous about your time, connecting other people. And how do you cultivate network when you have so many things going on? And how do you, really invest in those relationships so that they, create those meaningful opportunities?
I think the approach that I've taken throughout my career has always been, when I meet someone, whether it's you or anyone, for me, it's always thinking about, how can I help this person? And, what are they focused on? Is it joining a board? Is it trying to move to another industry? To your earlier point, is it trying to hire great talent? And so I think that approach, which, to me is just kind of core to who I am, has really helped me kind of build that network in a very authentic way. I think that term network, for better or worse, has some level of negative connotation. But I think when you come at it from a place of genuinely wanting to help and leverage, the people that to make an impact on someone's life, I've just found that comes back in spades.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point to note, because I think people who are successful at building community and networks really view it as a two-way relationship, right? It's not just about what you get out of it, but it's what you put into it and how you can leverage your resources to help other people too.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears a little bit, because this is a topic I'm really passionate about, especially for women, busy women that are building businesses. I found that creating space for health, fitness, wellness is so essential to helping me be on my top game. And I want to know your thoughts on that, and how do you cultivate wellness within, a very busy and hectic lifestyle?
Yeah. I would say there's a couple things that I do that kind of either I find as a way to relax or turn off or just to kind of, get away and find a source of rejuvenation. So kind of on a weekly basis, for me, taking salt baths is an incredible way to kind of unwind and just kind of get a good night's sleep, especially after a stressful day. The other thing that I have recently started, which has been incredibly fulfilling, is gardening, which I'm very passionate about. Actually was just at the flower market yesterday and did, repotted all my plants. So I do think that working with your hands, there's just something very, basic, but also rewarding about it. Yeah. And I wish, more people, it's so easy, it's so affordable, and it just brings so much joy. So that's definitely something that I do. And then, living in New York, every morning I walk to work, and it's actually, often where some of my best ideas come from, where, I'm just totally disconnected and thinking about my day ahead. And So those are a couple of things I do.
So obviously, over the past few years, there's been a lot of progress towards inclusivity, diversity within the funding landscape. But with where we are today, what further changes or developments do you hope to see in terms of gender diversity and inclusion within entrepreneurship and venture capitalism?
Yeah, so I think within venture capital, when you look at kind of the top of the stack, where does the actual capital come from? Comes from limited partners. So endowments, pension funds, institutional capital really drives the entire industry. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there needs to be just a stronger push, to kind of move the industry forward and more kind of flexible and innovative thinking around the fact that you just can't have another generation of funds where everyone looks the same. And so there's only one place where that pressure can come from, which is from the top. So, I'm hopeful that will happen, but it's taking time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the work that you're doing with the fund is definitely helping to put this industry in the right direction. So we're really proud of that. I know that some of our viewers and listeners may be aspiring to launch their own fund. And I'm curious to know what sort of advice would you give someone on that journey?
So first of all, I'll say, it's hard. Yeah. In many ways, I look back on my career and I'm like, maybe I should have just started a company because it's so much easier to raise money for that. But jokes aside, I think that from an experience standpoint, being able to talk about working at a fund or being an investor or an operator, quite frankly, is definitely very helpful. And then second, if you're in the position to be able to be an angel investor. So even writing small checks, being able to demonstrate that you have access to good deal flow, I think is important. And in lieu of that, you can also talk about your shadow portfolio. So, a portfolio that you're building of companies that you're excited about very early on. I think that demonstrates to your potential investors that you have your finger on the pulse, that you have access to entrepreneurs. So I would say all of those things, can be really helpful in that process.
So as you know, I recently launched a content site through nancytwine.com. And one of the topics that we get a lot of engagement with is around like cultivating a growth mindset, which I think is so essential for anyone who's building something to have, because ultimately you're going to face so many challenges and setbacks, and it's all about how you bounce back. And obviously you've had so many experiences where I'm sure like the challenges and setbacks may have gotten overwhelming at times. And like, how do you reset yourself and how do you sort of rebuild that motivation to just keep going?
I think for me, at the end of the day, the question I always ask myself is there anything else I'd rather be doing? In many of those cases, whether it was, starting a wine bar, which, really in a city that I'd never been to with a partner I met one time, or raising a first-time fund, at the end of the day, despite all the rejections, despite, the difficulties you have to overcome, there's truly nothing else in those moments that I would rather be spending my time on. And so I think that attitude has, and just asking myself that question, that this is really hard, but, if given the choice of working, in a more corporate job or giving it all up and, trying to do something else, the answer also always for me was to keep going.
And do you feel like you were always that way, or is that something that you had to develop? Really?
No, I mean, in my family, it's a joke. It's like at age 7, every summer, lemonade stand.
Wow.
Every summer. In college, I used to sell these beautiful pashmina shawls to all of my, my kind of roommates and my classmates. I was always selling something.
It's so funny. Like we are so similar in that way. And I do think it's like one of those early signs that you do have that like entrepreneur just in your spirit. I was doing similar things. Yeah. It was the fun thing to do. It was so exciting. Are there other people in your family that you feel like you may have gotten that from? Or are you like,
not at all.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I think my sister, I remember as a kid was just like, what are you doing? Like, why can't we just play and have fun?
Right.
And so it was not necessarily my parents. I think it's to your point. It's just like this innate, like when you think about where and how, what you are attracted to as a kid, right? I mean, there's so many different things you could do. You could ride your bike all day. You could go play with your friends. And for whatever reason, like for people like you and I, it's that ability to create something,
right,
and to build something, and in a small way. But it's still, I think, such a reflection looking back on actually who you are.
Completely. And I mean, I will tell you, I think sometimes with like our personality type, I think one of the challenges, and I've experienced this, I don't know if you have, where sometimes people think like I'm too intense, like they don't kind of understand like why I would be so relentless about something or so bold or so confident. And have you experienced that too? And like, how do you kind of deal with that? Because it's like, you don't want to change who you are, right? To accommodate someone else's comfort.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting. I was having this conversation over the weekend with a friend, and it's even harder in some ways in my position where you're rejecting people all the time.
Yeah.
And these are often people friends of friends. And it's the part of my job I hate the most because I feel for them and I want to try to be helpful. But the other way that I think about it is that, at the end of the day, there's the impact that we can make as a fund is so much more powerful. And when you touch so many people, there are always going to be people that are not happy. And as long as the people that are part of your community that know you, that are closest to you, know who you are and what your values are, how you're operating from a place of right and wrong, I think to me, that's the most important thing. Because as you're more and more successful, there are going to be more and more people, unfortunately, that, just are going to take a point of view. And that's not informed by a lot of time spent with you. It's informed by a small interaction, which, could be a day that you maybe weren't fully on. And so I think kind of using the lens of forgiveness and understanding that not everyone's going to like you. And as long as you feel like the people that matter are, and see you for who you are, I think that's been my approach.
Completely. And I think, one other thing that comes up a lot, and I think it's been like a big buzzword, I see it even on Instagram a lot, is this concept of like manifestation. And I'm just curious to know your thoughts on the word. I personally believe in manifestation. I think anyone can manifest, but I think sometimes people have an easier time manifesting because they have the inherent traits to do so, which are some of the things that we talked about, right? It's like having a vision, being relentless, continuing to chase it, even when doubts come into play. And so how do you think about that word? Or do you think it's just a bunch of fluff?
It's interesting. When I look back, there was no point in time when I ever said to myself, I really want to run a venture capital fund. That was not, my kind of, I want to be an astronaut or, whatever you grow up with. So I think for me, it's a powerful word, but it hasn't necessarily guided my career in the sense that, I never really said, okay, I'm going to sit down and manifest that, our next fund will be X size.
Right.
It's more been just to your point, like the relentlessness of like, just keep going because you're going to get to it at a certain point. But I think for me, it's been more about, things will work out.
Right.
And you just have to keep going to get there.
Exactly. And I think, for me, kind of the concept of manifestation has been like having a very clear vision, right? Sticking to it, but knowing that sometimes you're going to have to pivot because the world changes. But again, it's that consistency over time. And I think where a lot of people get stuck is they're either missing the vision piece. It's not very clear. So their actions aren't really guiding towards something meaningful. Or, again, it's just falling off course when you start to meet those, different roadblocks.
No, absolutely.
And you've had such an incredible career. You've done so much. And I know you're still working on some incredible things, but you also have to be thinking about the future. What does the future look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And, next year will be 10 years of Female Founders Fund.
Congrats.
Thanks. I feel like I'm in somewhat of a unique position where, as an entrepreneur, you're always thinking about what is your next thing. I think for me, I am incredibly grateful to be in a position where there's nothing else I want to do. We're really in this unique position of being able to do so many things at the same time. So really trying to move an industry forward, being able to think about, what direction the world is moving in, being able to work with incredible women, being able to, not only build, but also kind of nurture and cultivate this incredible ecosystem that every year grows bigger. And, you spoke at one of our events. So all of that work is really fulfilling. I think for me, as an entrepreneur, I'm always thinking about, I think we talked about this as well, what are the other kind of side projects or things once the fund is at a more stable place that I can get involved in. And I think for me, the next 10 years will be really being able to leverage that network and thinking about, other areas that I'm interested in to kind of expand into.
Well, that's really, really, really exciting. We're going to pivot to one of my favorite parts of this series, which is 5 fire facts. So I'm going to ask you a few questions and whatever comes to mind. This is just a way for our audience to get to know you on a deeper level and a more fun level. All right. First up, favorite wellness modality.
So actually, I'm gonna give you 2.
Okay.
So one is weights, which is new for me, and the second is cold plunge.
Oh, cold plunge. Oh my gosh. I have not been able to. It's just too intense for me.
Yeah, I love it.
Have you noticed a difference?
It's just the feeling afterwards is just, it makes my whole day start off in a different way.
Wow. I've got to get the courage up to do that for sure. All right. Up next, favorite travel destination.
South of France.
Love South of France. Last book you read.
Covenant of Water by Abraham Varghese.
Best productivity hack.
Very basic, but my morning to-do list.
Very important.
Just helps me focus on exactly what I need to get done without being, we all get distracted.
Yeah, completely. All right, last, favorite mantra or affirmation.
This too shall pass.
Very, very true. Well, Anu, this was incredible. I'm so glad that we got this time together. Your story is so inspiring, and I'm just rooting for you in such a big way. You were changing the game in so many ways, and I think our audience and community are going to get so much value from learning about your story and how you got to where you are today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I had such a great time chatting with Anu, and I want to share just a few of my key takeaways with you. So one of the things that I got from my conversation with Anu is that actually being inexperienced can be a true superpower. I think Anu is a pure example of that. She became a serial entrepreneur in several different industries that she didn't have any experience in. And sometimes when you don't have all the answers, it really forces you to do your research, to meet new people, to network, and to really think outside of the box. So if you're looking to start something in a completely new industry that you don't have experience in, don't worry, because you can really be successful if you invest the time in digging in deep. And also remember, don't let the fear of rejection get into your head, because persistence ultimately overcomes resistance. So Anu also talked about the importance of thinking about the impact of your legacy. It's something that I feel like a lot of people don't talk about, but Anu really encourages her founders not to just think about their business success, hitting numbers, making the returns. She really encourages them to think about the impact that they'll leave on the industry, and also what their success as a female founder, entrepreneur actually means for the greater good. And so I think that's so important, because I talk a lot about cultivating passion. And when you can think beyond just your business objectives, but also, the bigger impact that you want to have on the world and other women, I think that's when you can really, truly create lasting success and fulfillment. Another really important topic that Anu shared perspective on is this idea of not getting caught up in the short term, but also having a long-term vision. And I've totally been guilty of this. It's so easy to get tunnel vision and just think about what's in front of you because you have all these things to get done. But when you also really think about, okay, what's the 3-year, 5-year, 10-year plan? You can make sure that the steps that you're taking today, the seeds that you're planting today, will help you to get to where you ultimately want to be. So make sure that you're not just getting caught up in the short term, but you're really thinking about the possibilities that lie ahead in the future. So those were just a few of the many, many great insights that Anu had to share. Again, I just get so much out of these conversations, and I really hope that you did too. If you'd like to stay connected with Anu and Female Founders Fund, check out femalefoundersfund.com and follow Anu on Instagram at Anu Duggal and at Female Founders Fund. Don't forget to subscribe to this series, leave a review, and share this episode with your community. And you can follow us at Makers Mindset Podcast on Instagram and at The Makers Mindset on TikTok and YouTube. You can also follow me directly at Nancy Twine on Instagram and read more from me at nancytwine.com. Let me know your thoughts, questions, and ideas for future Makers Mindset episodes. Thanks so much for tuning in.